Hey, everyone. So, two quick things. First, my Facebook group page for the Suzanne Venker Show is back up. I'd been using that page for something else, but I have since moved it back to a private page just for listeners of the Suzanne Venker Show. I want a place where you all can talk with each other and where I can chime in periodically with questions and comments myself. So be aware that if you're itching to talk about the things you're hearing on this program, there is now a place to do that. Just go to facebook.com/groups/Suzanne's group. And if for some reason that doesn't work, just try going to Facebook and typing in the Suzanne Venker Show, and hopefully it will come right up. And then click on join. Okay, secondly, when was the last time you took a hot second to write a review of this podcast? I get super sad when I check it periodically and no one's written anything in like a week. I just wanted to tell you how much those reviews mean to me and to the algorithms too. Pretty sure the more reviews there are, the more the show will appear in other people's feeds and whatnot. So if you think you'll forget, like I know I probably would, keep in mind you can pause this program right now and do it, and you won't miss a thing when you come back. We'll still be here in the same spot. That's my favorite thing about podcasts. They're like DVR, which is so awesome. Okay, on with the show. From the magnificent Midwest, it's the Suzanne Venker Show, where men and women are equal in value but wildly different by nature. Join us here every week as we challenge the culture's hugely flawed narratives about men, women, sex, and love. From coast to coast and from around the world, thank you for joining us. How can couples deal with the changing sexual dynamic that is happening all over the Western world as we speak? That's what we're going to talk about today. It's a huge subject, and I did not want to do it on my own. So I have brought in somebody who, if you are a longtime listener, you will recognize her lovely voice from, maybe 2 years ago. But her name is Lauren Taylor, and she lives in South Africa, and she's a former coaching client of mine and my favorite person to talk to about this topic, which she knows so intimately. So first, I want to welcome Lauren back to the show. Hi, Lauren.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's good to be back.
So much has happened in your life, and you've been my longest standing client for whom I keep up with just after coaching. You know, like occasionally I hear from people, but you're the one that I don't. When did we first meet? I don't even know what year it was.
It was probably the year, I think it was the year of COVID, so the end of 2020.
Really?
I think. Yeah,
Huh,
I think
I
it
was
was.
thinking it was before COVID, but COVID kind of threw me off with everything. So, okay. So for those of you who didn't hear my original conversation with Lauren had, well, you'd explain, Lauren, what you had originally reached out to me about and give people sort of the, Cliff Notes version or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had been struggling in our relationship pretty much the majority of it. We're 33 now. We got married when we were 23. We've got 2 kids. But yeah, we both kind of started off on the same playing fields, small jobs, very young. I had then started an online business, and I didn't think much of it. I didn't think it would grow to what it did. And I hit the jackpots essentially. And within 6 to 12 months, I was making millions of rands. It was a lot of money very, very quickly. And so our lives changed very, very quickly. There were new cars, there were new homes, there were new things, there were new holidays. But as this wealth grew, so did the problems in the relationship. And Jared and I have always had an exceptionally close relationship. As you know, we get along very well. We've got a lot in common. And so it became very difficult and tiresome. We just couldn't find a resolution or what this thing was. We could never meet eye to eye. And the more I continued to make, the more this gap happened. The more I felt like his mother, the more I felt like he wasn't moving forward in life. And it just felt like I was moving in one direction and he was kind of staying in one place. And we tried things like therapy. We had done things like ADHD, adult ADHD, because I assumed I knew what was wrong with Jared. So it must have been the ADD, and it's an unresolved thing. And so we saw psychiatrists and therapists, and we were going to sort this ADD thing out. But still very confused. Like we couldn't put our fingers on what this was. And because of the nature of the way things happened, it wasn't really happening to people around us. It wasn't known on the internet either. So it just seemed like it was happening to us. And after years and years and years of trying to find out and try this and try that, I had listened to a podcast with you and Michaela Peterson. And within half an hour of that podcast, like the floodgates just opened. It was like everything was so clear, so much made sense. And that's when I kind of reached out to you, and it became apparent of why we had ended up in this situation and what was really causing our problems. And, by that stage already, I had pretty much orchestrated our whole life. If I look back now, there was no decision making on Jared's behalf. There was no, it was all left up to me, and I created this life. And what I thought would make me so happy didn't. I wasn't happy. In fact, I was very unhappy.
What was it that
So,
you thought would make you happy? You said what I thought would make me happy.
a lot of what drove my success wasn't necessarily the greed for money. It was security. And it was security I wasn't getting from my husband. And the more I had, the more secure I would feel. Yet I didn't feel that way at all. It was worse because I obviously wasn't getting what I needed from my husband. So it just felt like more money was the answer, more money, more control, more, just more of surety in my life would be the thing that made me feel safe. And yet I didn't feel safe at all, not at all. And yeah, we reached out to you and started our journey and learning so much. And we obviously benefited so much from it. But like we spoke the last time, it is a journey. It is such a journey. Still to today, it is such a journey. Yeah.
And you've probably thought about this before, and you probably talked about it together, but how do you imagine things would have been if it was reversed? If he had been the one that started the business and everything that happened, and you were the one in his boat, do you think, or do you, well, I'm sort of baiting you now because I know the answer to this, but I want what I believe is the answer to this, but I'm sure I think you would agree. Do you imagine that he would have had the same response to that you would have?
No.
That you did, I mean.
Not at all. No, I doubt it very much. I think that's all he's ever really wanted. I think that's what any man and a married man wants, is to be able to provide and to earn the money and feel accomplished in what they're doing. And yeah, it would have been very, very different.
Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, because what you just described, you now know, is not unusual, or it's not. It may not be the norm, but it is not unusual. So I'm gonna throw out some figures about how many marriages look like yours and all of that, and we're gonna get into the weeds on this. But you're right. I don't care what men and women say, that basically at the end of the day, men still want to provide and protect, and women still want to nest. And this should not be a marital problem for anyone, except that it is, because while it may not be politically correct to admit, men and women have not been educated about this reality and don't realize how a role reversal is going to affect their relationship until they're knee deep in the problem because of it. And I mean, this deep biological reality just wallops couples, which I know is what happened to you, and they don't know how to make sense of it or even what to do with it. And that's essentially what you just explained that you experienced. Yes.
And I think for Jared and myself, I'm so grateful that we had it in us to keep going, because I don't think it was difficult, and there was something special about our relationship that allowed us to get to that point of even discovering you. And I don't see that a lot of people can make it through that. That's why having, I feel like especially in the last 2 years, there's definitely more of an awareness of it. But it's sad for those that don't even make it to the point of knowing, because they just continue the same thing in the next relationship and probably attract the same type of man. She's in her dominance and she continues to attract, a more feminine type of man. And so the cycle continues, because really the healing is done, yeah, within yourself. It's not the change of a person. It's you. It's the change of you.
100%. And what I really loved? Well, I can tell you one reason why I think that you guys are a success story, and that is that you both have a very strong faith background. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we talked about that a lot, and divorce just wasn't an option in your head.
Yeah.
Especially
and with kids.
Yeah, right. Except that what is interesting is that, remember when you got with me at first, and then I don't think we had an initial intro call, the 30-minute intro call, and then you separated.
Mm-hmm.
Remember? Because it got so bad after we first talked, I'm pretty sure. And then like 4 months went by, then he moved back in, and then you called me and we started working together. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I love that. I love separation stories that end in getting back together, because I don't love people to separate, but I love to show that it can get that bad and you can find your way back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's not even the first time we've separated.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And the only. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's why I wanted to have you here, is because if you guys can do it, as far as I'm concerned, anybody can, because you've taken this as far as you possibly, it couldn't have gotten any more close to divorce. Yes.
Yep.
And yeah, it's that perseverance that's so huge in your story. Okay. So, I want to start with the share of women who are out earning their husbands right now, who are in your boat. Okay. It's tripled over the last 50 years, from 5%. This is, at the beginning of 1960 or 70. Gosh, are we that far along? To 16%. Now, this is in America, so just keep that in mind. This is from the Pew Research Center. Also, only 16% of marriages have a wife who earns more than her husband. So I want to be clear that while it's tripled over the past 50 years, it was only 5% back then. And so that tripling is huge, but the numbers are still small, relatively speaking. 16% of all marriages. That's not a lot of marriages. It feels to me like it's bigger, doesn't it? Because of how much it's in the media.
Definitely.
Does that number
and
surprise
that's
you?
in South Africa as well. We see that, in our group of friends, we're seeing it, especially as times seem to be getting more economically difficult. We seeing it with so many of our friends where she's out earning, and a lot of it is online jobs. It's interesting. It's a lot of women who are working online, that these huge disparities seem to come into play. And as these industries speed up online, you can sort of see it happening more and more and more.
Definitely. That's been a huge piece of this. Just flat out the technology and ability to work from home, which is a great thing. And nobody really thought much of it, I'm sure, when they started, especially because you can do it very part-time. I do it today in a very part-time way where I have total control of my life, and it's a lovely thing. And it never took over anything like what you described yours did. In part because it's different work, but also, I didn't go all in that way. So it can be done in a much lighter way if you want it to. And I think that's great. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I came across this study, and I wanted to, address it with respect to what I just said about the share of women out earning over the past 50 years. In the Institute of Family Studies, Rosemary Hopcroft, who's a professor at the University of North Carolina, had checked the data on marriages in which the wife earns more than the husband, because the Wall Street Journal had published an article just last month which claimed that marriages in which the wives out earn their husbands are not only more common, but less likely to end in divorce than in the past. Well, Rosemary Hopcroft examined that data and found that that wasn't accurate. So in her study, or in her article, she explains how she went through that data, and that her results suggest, or the results that she studied suggest, that the spouse who provides the most financially in the marriage matters differently, which goes back to what we were saying, to husbands versus wives. And they are consistent with the claim that women still value the financial prospects of a spouse more than men do. So the idea that men and women are interchangeable in this way, which is what that Wall Street Journal article was suggesting, that, oh, it doesn't cause any problem, is in fact not true. The reality is that husbands and wives work for different reasons, and their response to working, especially alongside caregiving, mothering, parenting, differs as well. And that is the source of so much marital conflict today. So I thought that was just, I'm glad that that woman pointed that out. So let's talk for a minute about how married women think differently about money than the way married men do, which, just to back up a bit, isn't to say that that's full stop just a gender thing. We all come to our relationships with our own relationships with money that stem from our upbringing. But I think in your case with Jared, you have similar upbringings. I mean, not really, but in some ways you do, in some ways you don't, as I recall.
Yeah, in some ways, both middle class, although Jared's definitely had more of a wealthier upbringing. So I don't think, money was a big problem for them, whereas my situation was a little bit different. There were sporadic events and times when there was money, but most of the time, my mom worked full time. She's still at the same company that she's been at since the day I was born, or a few months after that. So she's been at her company for 34 years. And so it was a little bit different. I
Hence
had
your
to work
security,
hard.
hence your your greater
Yeah,
need for security. And
yes, for security. And she was always like stable, whereas my dad's sort of income, he was an entrepreneur. It was always up and down. So she was always that one that provided the consistency and the safety. But if I wanted a phone, I always had to work for everything that I got. I always remember feeling very sort of jealous of the other kids that had phones or had this or went on these holidays, and always had this sense in me like, I want that one day. And my mom would always say, trust Lauren. If she chooses something, if she won't even see the price, it'll always be the most expensive thing. It's like I just always had this like, there's a quiet taste to certain things. So I suppose it was always there. There was always a hunger for having things that I never had.
Mm-hmm.
But as I grew older, it was about, again, security, the mindset of not having, being scared of not having. And also something that I want to bring up now, which I've learned in the last 2 years, and that I've really had to heal myself with, is perfectionism. It's so big. And I think the women who are in these situations, who are dealing with this particular level in their relationship, probably suffer from some form of perfectionism. And so it was, a lot of control, making sure that there was going to be enough. Also not spending a certain way. So Jared and I have different ideas of how to spend money. I could relate very much to the lady in that YouTube video, where she kind of making money but scared to spend it and wants to save it all the whole time. It was very much like that for me. There was some differences. Jared was more of kind of like a hippie in his thinking, he'll think about tomorrow when it gets there, very carefree. He was given the name Peter Pan, from his teen years, because that's Jared in a nutshell, just a wild, free spirit. And that also made it particularly more difficult, is I also felt very alone often the time, that he wasn't seeing the reality of the situation. So I had to take it on, and which I did very, very well.
Well, since
But
you brought up control, let's talk for a minute about what could be considered the invisible costs of control, or unknowingly creating the very dynamic that you hate, right? Because we think we believe that what we're doing is causing us to feel more in control, which to some degree it does, but the cost of that is huge. So tell people about, well, actually, before you do, let me just frame that a little bit for people better. I have been obsessed with this new podcast called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, who now has a Netflix series with the same I Will Teach You to Be Rich brand. I just listened to the podcast, but you can actually watch people talk as well. I just listen, but it's sort of like people know I'm a big Dave Ramsey follower, and it's the same idea of call-ins about people's money situations in their relationships, only he takes one couple and does a deep dive every episode. So I've kind of flipped my obsession, and I'm listening to those. And there's so much that I don't agree with about him. But that's still fascinating. But what I've noticed is that I've listened to so many now, and at least half, if not more, probably more, he's walking right into the dynamic that we're talking about, where the woman is significantly out earning. And actually, the data shows that it doesn't matter if you earn just a little bit more or a lot. It's not good either way around. But let's be honest. I mean, the bigger it is, the more problematic I think it is. So, one of the things that he had said actually just this morning, I was listening to one couple where she out earns him 5 times over, whatever, and she's kind of the way that you describe in terms of type A, controlling everything, wanting security and all of that. And she's basically controlling everything financially related in their relationship. Everything. Like, he doesn't even know what's going on. He has nothing to do with the finances whatsoever. And so that is a very specific dynamic that is disempowering her husband. And then when he has a problem, she tries to solve it, which disempowers him even more. And what really bugged me when Ramit was pointing out this dynamic, he says it's a classic example, only it's usually with the genders reversed. And I started laughing like, no, that is not at all accurate. Like, as though the typical man would behave in that exact same way as the higher earner, which is such bullshit. But anyway, so I don't want to steer people off of the program because it's still worth listening to, but that just bugged me, so I had to say that. But anyway, so I'm sure you can relate. And could you just talk a little bit about those invisible costs of control?
So, and I'll try and put it to you in a way of almost starting from the unconscious level, that space where you don't know that you don't know yet.
Yeah.
And what starts to happen there is frustration. So that starts initially is frustration, is because you unconsciously controlling everything and perfecting everything, but then there's this partner and they're not doing the thing you want them to do. So there's a lot of friction and frustration that starts. The resentment comes out, and then once the resentment sort of peaks itself through, then anger. And that was one of my emotions that I felt a lot, was anger. I was very angry, and you feel very alone, you feel very lonely, and you start to find yourself in situations where you're being judged from an outside source. I mean, you don't know it yet, but you feel something's off. So your interactions, even in your social situations with your partner, they start to shift because people pick it up. And so that's kind of the state that you're in for a long time. And I'm talking a few years of this constant struggling. And really where I got to in the last, I'd say 18 months to 2 years, when we kind of reached out, and what's happened since then, is that you actually tire yourself out. You just cannot, it cannot happen anymore. So it reaches a point of burnout. It's a complete burnout. And I think people have a choice there of what happens with you next. And for me, it's been a surrender thing. And if that's not checked, like with myself, I'd left it for so long. We had left it for so long. And then depression starts to set in. So you're depressed. So your will to fight back also diminishes. It also starts to become less and less. It's very different when you find something out and you're excited and you want to work on something. And I think that's what is so important for people to hear here, is that you will find this thing out, you will go for the coaching, or you'll do the course, or whatever it is, and you're motivated, and you do all the things. But the thing is that it's not going to just work like that.
No.
It's really a lifetime practice now for Jared and I, where there's some things that we really picked up on very quickly, and there's other things, the deeper issues that we've had to get through, that we're still stuck on. And I think that's the biggest thing is not to over expect too much, and to accept that it's a lifelong journey, and celebrate the wins and just acknowledge that not everything's going to be perfect all along. So when it comes back to your question about, what are the invisible things that come out, is that if left unchecked for too long, it can also, you guess you experience all these emotions, and these things start to happen. And again, if burnout gets to that point of burnout, and depression sets in, you also start to lose integrity with yourself. And so, it's your identity as a person. And that's what happened to me as well. When you're in those low vibe emotions for so long, and trying to control everything, and it's not going your way, and there's no surrendering and letting go, you start to have an inner war with yourself, because now, you should do better. And especially as a perfectionist, you're the one whipping yourself too. You're not just whipping
Yeah,
everyone around you
100%.
and
Yeah.
you're doing it to yourself too. In fact, it's worse for
It's like
yourself.
you're bringing him along for the ride, your ride.
Yeah, exactly. He's just getting, a taste of how you are with yourself, really.
Yes.
And if that's something that you can't heal, or accept to heal, because that's the first thing, is acknowledging, I am that type of person. And it's hard to be like that when you're a perfectionist. You really don't think there's much wrong with you. You really don't. But to get to that point of truly wanting to work with it, and taking your parts, if you don't, I think, yeah, your identity can be severed through that as well, which is dangerous.
Um, yeah. So I want to, I was thinking when you were talking that another obvious breakdown, I don't want to spend too much time on it today because I don't, I have other things I want to get to, but the sex. The sex
Oh,
tends to be the first thing to go at the end of this whole process. And that's just for obvious reasons. If you want to say something about that, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to move to
yeah,
something else.
absolutely. And I think that also stems from the feeling like you're the mom. So you feel like a mother that has to look after their child. Um, it's and it's from both sides. It's not just your feeling towards him. He's feeling repulsed by you in many ways as well, because of your dominance and your leading and your controlling ways. You feeling like his mother. So yeah, there
Who wants to
does
have
come
sex
this
with their
time.
mother?
No, you don't. You really don't. So that's again where you then start living in this dynamic of, like you say, like a roommate. You just like a roommate, and you just carry on. And you get used to that. And that's the part where I say is just be careful not to leave it unchecked, because you become okay with that. You become okay with that's just how it is.
Yeah, because you don't know what else to do. So it's like get divorced or stay like this,
Yeah.
right? And we're going to talk at the end, just for everybody listening, about some solutions to this. So I don't want to just have people think we're just going to like explode on what the problem is and then leave you hanging. But here's what I want to focus on is more specifically the attitude and beliefs that happen with this scenario, and that is that. And actually, it doesn't even have to be when the woman greatly out earns the man. It can even just be for anybody who's both married and both earning of in any capacity. This idea, you've probably heard this phrase, my money is our money, but her money is hers, or what's
Yeah.
mine is mine and what's yours is ours, which I think is so destructive and 100% the wrong way well, at least let's just say it's not going to get you where you want to go. I don't believe. So the interesting thing about this mentality is it used to be very common to say this and sort of joke about it, even back in my mother's day. My mother didn't do that, but I know that people did. If she had an inheritance, for example, and that's considered sort of, we're going to talk about the specific of whether you earn it or even have an inheritance, because at the end of the day, it's not from his earnings that caused that particular pot, whether you work outside the home or you inherited money. So the circumstances can be very similar. And it's not just many women who think, well, this is mine, I earned it, or this is separate from what he's supposed to provide for the family. And then this is just sort of side money. Even men think about it this way, because at the end of the day, I don't believe that the average man wants to take money from his woman. I believe that. They definitely don't want to have to say to her that they can't afford something. They want to be the one who provides that. So it's not that working, if you're married is and the woman is bad, it's how are you handling it? And what are you doing with the inevitable difference in the way you're seeing that money come through the door? So there's keeping it separate, which is horrible in my opinion, and I've talked endlessly about that. It has to be in one pot. But then there's also the added piece that even when it is in one pot, and this is where it gets hairy, he's always going to be aware of the amount that's coming from you versus him. Always, always, always. And that's a good thing. That means he's a grown man, right? He's not a man boy, who is, most men are not going to be comfortable having their woman out earn them in that way, and be relying on her. And that's okay. That's a good thing. That's not something to say that that is bad. That's actually a good sign. So can we speak to that for a moment about the attitude and the belief about the money coming in the door?
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, I remember that was one of the first things that we did with coaching as well. Well, at some point was this concept of the money coming together. And that was a difficult one for me as well. Because at that point, I already felt like I'd done so much. I'd given so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'd bought so much. I'd provided so much. And now you're asking to do more? That's what it felt like. But if I look back now and like you ask about the attitude, I was so desperate at that point. I knew what we were doing wasn't working. And I knew it was an opportunity for him to have more control and an opportunity for me to relinquish some control. And this was now the biggest thing in our lives that I had the most control over. So it was a biggie to hand that over. And it wasn't a complete handover. We still, we did the budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that what we were doing was right. But we put everything into one account. And it's made a huge difference since then. It took a while for Jared to feel comfortable with that even.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been 2 years, and I would say only now
Mm-hmm.
are we in a position where, he's obviously earned some money since then, and his money goes in there. But it's also, allowed him some time to get comfortable with that and to trust me. That was the part. It wasn't
Trust, right?
necessarily that he was uncomfortable. It was that every time he drew money, and again, in the beginning, you're not just going to get this right. There were
No.
times where I was like, oh, this is cool, this is cool. And then all of a sudden it wasn't cool. And I would send a WhatsApp like, where did this money go? What did you just spend it on? And it wasn't even much money at all. It was just, he'd bought something or for the house or whatever it was. And then I realized I was getting back into a behavior where I was questioning his every purchase. And then it was like, okay, back off now. So, you take a few steps forward and a few steps backwards. And it's also allowed us the opportunity for us to, review the budget like we do every 2 weeks, and we go over it, and to allow him to make some decisions, even when I don't think that they're right.
There you go.
And that's been the biggest thing, and to really hold myself back. And this goes back to perfectionism now and the connection with the nervous system. And that, again, this is in my discovery has been the biggest key point is your nervous system, because you can tell yourself as much as you like, don't get angry, don't get angry, don't get angry. But if your nervous system is dysregulated and your body's saying something else and you just want to take the control back, that's where a lot of the healing's coming now, is taking responsibility for those emotions, for that control. And even if I think that the outcome could be bad and not go my way with whatever he chooses to do with the money, I've had to trust the advice that I've been given, which is he will learn in his own way. And it's just allowing things to play out and to surrender to the outcome of that, and to sit back and really let him take the
100%.
consequence.
And depending on how far deep into the woods you got with that dynamic will determine how long it will take. You guys had about as extreme as you could, with an income disparity and the whole 9 yards. So if that's, again, going back to, that's why if you can do it, anybody can do it, because most people will not be in your boat. Most people don't make millions from their business. So if you just make, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 or 30,000 more, you're I never did a study on, the difference, but I I imagine it's a little bit less, but the dynamic is still there, and it might not take you as long or as far to undo it, but it's absolutely a process. You're right. And let's face it, at the core of this is trust. This is about trust. It's just like you said, it's our own individual problems that we're bringing into the marriage, and whether it's the guy or the gal on this particular, whether it's the guy or the gal, at the end of the day, people have a tendency to go as high or as low as your expectations. And if you assume they're going to fail, and you don't trust, as a result, they probably will. But the reverse is also true. Assume the best, assume they will, let him or her screw up once or twice without commenting, that kind of thing. And eventually it will stabilize. But that's why what you're saying is right about how long it takes to balance this upside down.
And another thing I've realized through this process of this trying to, we've made some big decisions to get there, and you do think it's just going to happen, but it doesn't. So we're still, I'd say we're in the real transitioning phase now, where things are starting to flip. But it's also to be don't be hard on yourself, because I've realized through these 2 years what we're up against. It's not just a case of, well, he must earn more and I'll learn less. This is years and years of unconscious trauma, and so much that's biologically gone against us that we have to undone. It's the lifestyles we live. We're so distracted by so many things. So you can be on a path, and Jared and I have become conscious of this, and then a few weeks pass by and you're so easily drifting into old ways because there's so much pulling for your attention. So again, weekly communication on these things is imperative. When you get lazy with it, you start to see how quickly
100%.
things unravel. So we've had to really be very
vigilant,
strategic and consistent with our communication, and coming back to certain points. And then also realizing, in South Africa at the moment, economically, things are difficult. So we constantly racking our brains, and we're like, okay, how do we figure this out? How do we figure this out? So we're always asking questions about, financially, things are really tough here. So for most people, 2 people would have to work, but we're so adamant on how we're going to make this work. And that means living on less. We've had to get to a place. And that's been a process for me, because I've had to trust that it's okay to live on less. So again, lots of work with the nervous system, working on my nerves, reevaluating my priorities, my values. So it's not just about changing a money thing. It's often about changing your values.
And that's where the budget, sorry.
Yeah. So that's something people need to be prepared.
Yes,
be prepared
for sure.
to do.
Because it's not really about money. It's not really about the math at all.
Yeah.
And so you're going into a deep dive to something very psychological. The math part is actually kind of secondary. And that's why it's so important. I'm going to do a whole separate thing on budget meetings, because people are so scared of that word or that concept. And there were years when we didn't do this at all. But it has been a game changer in our marriage, because it forces you to get into the weeds on exactly what you just said is, do we need this? Do we want this? Do we agree on this? Do we think differently about this? And of course, we're not always in sync, but you got to get in sync. In other words, you're not initially in sync, but you have to get in sync if you're going to move forward financially. And that plays out in such a fabulous way in other aspects of your life, because that's where the team mentality really starts to flourish, in my opinion. And I think that's why you guys have been so successful despite all of the hardship, is because you have such an all-in attitude. I mean, I know that's why, because I've worked with couples endlessly who are not all in. And I can tell you just from that is your biggest difference, in my opinion, from what I've seen.
And I think just on the all-in concept, I think for me that became very clear when the penny dropped, that it wasn't just Jared.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was always him. It was always him. I'm doing perfectly. I'm making the money. I'm moving forward. When it was all peeled back, and it was an understanding of how this has happened to us in a way, I had no choice but to see and take responsibility. I had to, because it wasn't just, this is a complete societal thing. It's happening to so many of us. So when I understood that, And even in my, moments of thinking it would be better to be with someone else, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is the crazy thing with women who are in this
Space.
perfectionistic,
Mm-hmm.
controlling, successful space, is that they have an idea of what they would like. And he's also this mega successful guy. He's got his, stuff together. He is providing, he's making a lot of money. But what these women don't know is those type of men don't want these type of women. The
Exactly.
providing man, the one who's doing really well, he is looking for the submissive, happy, open, receiving, easygoing, the wife,
Non-career driven person.
not the one who's going to come and control his life and tell him what to do and compete with him
It's so obvious.
financially.
Once you see it, you can't unsee
Yeah.
it, right?
And I think once I saw that and I understood that, it was a case of, okay, well, that's not a solution. That's why I understand why divorce is not a solution. But again, I had to get there. I had to
Mm-hmm.
really understand that divorcing him and moving on is futile. Doesn't matter. It's going to be
Exactly.
more difficult for me.
Exactly.
It's going to be harder. I've got a good man. He's loyal. He's trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's things I know about him for sure, that I don't need to question. So
And
I
this is,
knew that that was not the way.
and that's why I'm so, I try so hard to convey that, who you're marrying is really your most important financial decision, your most important life decision, but really your most important financial decision, because your well-being is all predicated on that. And the younger generation is feeling the brunt of having been groomed to prioritize money over love. And so what's happening with young women now is that, for one thing, they've been taught to tie their self-worth, for example, with their net worth, which is typically more of a male thing. So I try to explain why it's so different for a man than for a woman. And the only way I ever came up that I think was pretty decent in a way to explain it is that men can't do what we women can do. We women have the power to do the most miraculous thing in the world, right? Carry this life for 9 months, nurse that life, nurture that life, have that baby look at us like we are God, right?
Yeah.
In a way that's very unique to you as a mother. And that makes a man feel very left out. It's not that they secretly wish they could give birth. It's just they're standing back, sort of looking at this like, wow, where am I in this? What's my role? And it is no different today than it was 100 years ago. It has always been thus, because women are always going to be the ones who have babies and not men. So what can they do? They can provide for you. And that's what feeds their soul and their self-worth. That's normal. That's natural. That's in their DNA. That's God-given. But we've taught women to try and tie their self-worth to their net worth in the same way that a man typically will. And it's screwing them up, the women.
Yeah. Yeah. And something I've noticed as well, again, from experience, is just, and also how, um, it's so, it's like it tickles your ears, or it's so appealing, because there's also this whole push with the personal development aspects in it. So there's a very self-seeking process that happens, of self-improvement. And a lot of that is tied to making money. So how much self-improvement can I do? And especially for a perfectionist, we
Yeah.
are addicted to stuff like that. That's what validates us. That's
Yeah.
what makes us, that's why it's never enough for a perfectionist, because it's,
There's always more that can be improved
there's
upon.
always more.
Yeah.
And the
I
more I
relate.
can validate, the more
Mm-hmm.
self-worth, the more self-worth, and more self-worth. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very, and I think the online space, if I, even because that's where my money was made, it's so fast moving. The results also can be really quick and the wins are there. So it's just validate. And especially as you're making that money, it's just like, again, more. That's how I get myself worth. That's how I get myself worth. That's how. So there is, like you say, there's no end to it. It consistently just, it's never enough.
You know, there's a major dating conundrum now. I know we're talking mostly about marriage, but where women, as we know, women are becoming more educated than men, as well as out earning many of them. And I know parents who are super concerned about their daughter's choice in a boyfriend, because they're concerned that these particular men that they're choosing cannot provide. This is a huge, like, sort of hush hush thing right now that I'm seeing. And it's a legit one. I mean, it is a legit one. I mean, and what's interesting is a lot of these parents don't realize that they kind of groomed their daughters to become men, right? They kind of caused it.
Well, even just,
unknowingly, of course.
Yeah, even just even the concept of, I mean, if you think about marriage, there's a reason why the father walks the daughter down the aisle. It's a physical, spiritual, and handover. With what's happening now, by 18 years old, daughters are leaving to university. They're actually leaving the protection of their father, of the masculine, and they're being dumped out, free to kind of do what they want with no protection. So they've lost their protection. And like you say, there is an element of grooming that has almost masculinized the daughters.
And so they are, going back to what you said a moment ago, attracting that other type.
Yes,
unknowingly.
They're attracting.
And then the moms and dads are going, what's going on? And it's like, well, you didn't raise her to incorporate marriage and motherhood into her plans. You raised her to just be a linear male thinking career.
Independent, strong woman.
Right, exactly. So they're attracting the opposite type, but they don't see this. No one told them that. They didn't put that together. They're just now seeing it. And they're not even making that connection. They're just seeing that. They're like, what the hell's wrong with all these men? As though there are no young men who are doing really well, which there are, but you're not going to see as many of them if you've raised your daughter to be a career woman. That's just the reality of it.
I think it's a concern, for parents of sons too, because if you consider the type of woman they end up with, you think he's going to end up being controlled and out-earned and disrespected, and is she going to divorce him? And so I can imagine from both sides. I mean, my boys are still young, but already now understanding masculine traits and trying to display that to our sons, and making them aware of what does a feminine female look, how does she talk, how does she behave. And he'll come, I mean, Aaron's 10 now, and he'll come home and he'll be like, that girl's really masculine. She did this and this. So he's already
uses that word.
Yeah, she's really bossy. And
bossy. There you go. Now that's more common than I think you'd hear. Right. And isn't that funny how quickly they pick up on that? Because they don't want that. They see it around them, and it's probably mostly what they see. And unless they've been groomed at home to know what to look for, they're going to wind up with that person that they don't want.
And the biggest thing, I think, like with the boys, and with obviously Jared's learning along with them, that's kind of the reality of what the situation is that he's really, so everything he's learning is transferring. And I think the biggest thing would be, for Jared, I know it's trusting his instincts, because like we've had conversation where he said, like, it always felt wrong. It always felt wrong, but he always put his feelings aside, or how he felt, and so with the boys now, the kids, it's a case of trying to get them familiar with their instincts.
That's very
because
good. Yes, because go ahead. As you know, what I think I know. What
as you know, like for ourselves, those instincts were always there. Even for me, something was wrong. Something is off. Something I just couldn't. I don't know what it is. Something's not right.
And for Jared, is not normal. Not just Jared, but all husbands, they really struggle between wanting to give you what you want, wanting you to be happy, that providing piece, and also wanting to be the provider. So it's like, where do they draw the line on, okay, I want you to be happy and have what you want, but hey, I need to be in this role at all times, because otherwise it's not going to go well. They don't even know to say that, even though they're probably feeling it.
Yeah. And I think that's what was hard for Jared as well. And he said it was confusing for him because even though he was giving me everything he thought I wanted, I still wasn't happy. In fact, I just got more and more and more unhappy in the relationship. And the more he would like give me what I want, but it's not what I want. It's not what I needed. That's actually, it's not even, because it probably was what I thought I wanted, but I needed something else. I needed something I didn't know that I needed. I mean, and the more he tried, I mean, shame, like obviously as the bank balances and mine's growing, I mean, like he said, eventually he just felt like, like a lion. He's like, if I don't need to go and catch food, why am I, he just said, and the more I made, the more he felt like there's just no way I can compete with this. So,
Exactly. Bingo. That's it in a nutshell. And
yeah,
so what happens? They just give up. The
yeah,
incentive is gone. And
yeah,
that's why earning less is the more natural or ideal scenario. It's not, it's just a reality of it. I mean, not everybody's story is going to be that, but it is more natural and you will not have these problems. So let's get into a little bit of some conclusions here. And we didn't go through this before we got on here, but I'm going to tell you what I've sort of put together, and you can chime in. What I'm concluding from all of my work with this is that at the end of the day, the husband must be providing enough in whatever way this means to him, regardless of what his wife is choosing for herself. Now, this is an ideal scenario. It's not always going to come out so cleanly. But that whole men being torn between wanting you to be happy and needing to be the provider, that's really what they're contending with. And everybody can see once they live it that the role reversal ultimately becomes a dynamic that's unsustainable for sexual attraction for sure, because it becomes this mother-son dynamic, and nobody wants that. So what's the best solution? How do you fix this? I can hear people going, well, what are you saying now? Women just shouldn't get educated, and just go back in the kitchen and all of that. Which of course is completely impossible and not even necessarily preferable. So where are we? What are some solutions? The most obvious is not to get into the situation to begin with, obviously. And that goes back to what we were talking about with parenting, teaching your sons and daughters about this stuff without fear of how it sounds, whether it's politically incorrect or not, who gives a crap? This is your kids and their lives we're talking about. Talk to them about the differences between men and women and how to map out a life that is most successful for them being male and female and what they are potentially going to want in a partner. So that's the most obvious, is not getting there to begin with. If you're already there, though, this is the bigger question, because I know people are like, okay, now what? What if we're already there? And my answer is always the same. Do what you have to do to reverse this dynamic ASAP. So what does that look like? And we're going to talk about what it would look like for you in a second. It might mean moving out of a state, moving out of a house to another one, any kind of moving that helps your financial situation move away from that dynamic. It can mean working part-time for her instead of full-time, or in some cases, not at all. Kind of depends on what your circumstances are. And at least trying that out to see how it feels and looks. And then always you can add more to it later, but to just see what we're talking about and how dramatically that would change your dynamic. But of course, that gets into the money, the weeds on the money, and how this is going to work. Because if you've set up this dynamic where everything she's earning is your livelihood, it gets complicated for sure. It is doable, and it's going to be a long process, but it is doable. And I don't see any other way out. Do you?
no. We've had to make drastic decisions, really, to take this. And like you say, it's in our situation where it was such a
Top
big
heavy.
difference,
Mm-hmm.
and it is taking that time. But yeah, it's meant for us that having again reaching burnout and understanding the situation. It's meant me really slowing down in business. The last year I've slowed down, so any sort of strategies and marketing campaigns and pushing the business further stopped. And then it got to the decision of looking to selling the business, and now I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
taking on a partner, another male, a man,
Mm-hmm.
who can, come in again in a more professional business way, but the same thing, to be provided for by someone else, who can make the decisions on my behalf, because I've literally got decision fatigue. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to be responsible for making any decisions. Like, my decision bank is done. I did years of it. Like, I need a bit of a break. So it's meant taking in this process of Jared finding work and moving in and cultivating an income to, I wouldn't even say match it, because I don't see how
No,
we'd ever
no, well,
match the
no,
type
no,
of
of
money
course
I
not.
was making again. And so it's just about, we moved homes. That's like you
Mm-hmm.
say, we moved.
Mm-hmm.
We've decided on a different lifestyle, which encompasses self-reliance. We've started growing our
Homesteading.
veggies. We've got our solar. And so we know that that is a good move for us, because it can help us financially a lot, and also with the way things are going in the world, it just makes it's a good way for us to move. Um, it's meant selling a lot of things, and specifically things with regards to the unseen. They call it like the unseen things, the unseen
You mean the invisible costs?
work.
Uh,
Yeah, well, and not just the cost, but the invisible workload that
Oh,
women
yeah,
speak
yeah.
about, which really
Mm-hmm.
is a thing. I experienced what that felt like.
Yes.
So all these things in our life that took a lot of decisions, took a lot of time, a lot of maintenance, we've had to simplify that. Um, so that there's less to do, less to pay for, less to worry about. Um, and yeah, where I see myself moving forward now is, if I need to spend an hour on my business every day and check in with the new partner and see what he's up to or help in any way, then I can do that. I've requested a small little salary that we'd need to maintain ourselves with, and then I want to work on my little homestead and grow my veggies and start that and fetch my kids in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
not be in a rush, be able
Mm-hmm.
to sit and do their homework
Mm-hmm.
with them and go for a walk, help my son study, do what he needs, and then also focusing on our health, because if we're both working, when it comes to the budget and making better choices when it comes to saving money on the food and the groceries, when you're working full time and running a business and doing all these things, those are the type of things that fall short. um, and it's those things that we want to pick up. And I know that if I have the time to be able to do those things, um, Jared doesn't have to worry about it. He's not there worrying about the things that he
Yes.
shouldn't be worrying
Uh,
about. He can worry about
Yeah.
what he needs to do, and
Yes.
that's make money.
Um, yeah, that's so, so huge. And I want to also point out something you said, because I don't want it to get overlooked, that is so important. And that is that you got weighed down by the decision making. And I hear this time and time again from people, and I cannot convey it enough. When a woman is in the role of making all the decisions, it is terribly taxing on her. She doesn't like it. It's too much, even if it seems like she wants to make all the decisions, which is what a lot of men think. So that's why they stay out of it. She's actually miserable. But men don't get that way. They like to be the ones in charge. And nobody wants to talk about this. It emboldens them to make those decisions on behalf of his family. I've seen this in action. So that's a great example about how men and women are made so differently and are intended for different roles, that is so taboo to talk about today, but is nevertheless true. And so I just wanted to pick up on what you said, that was so important. I didn't want it to
Yeah.
get missed.
And it just frees your mind up, like a part of this whole journey for me. Again, it goes back to the nervous system again. And that's where this more slow paced, slow living, what are my real thoughts? What are my real thoughts without the decision making, without the business? Because just
Yes.
running a business alone requires constant decision making. That
Yes,
is a business,
exactly.
figuring out the next problem and solving problems. Um, so I kind of feel like, yeah, I've been very sort of um, I wouldn't say poisoned, but very manipulated. My thoughts have been
Mm.
manipulated over the years and conditioned. So again, this is a journey. This is years and years of
Mm-hmm.
undoing. And I just see myself, working in my garden, not being on a screen, not listening to stuff anymore, but really just being with myself, and connecting back with that person and healing that nervous system, because then I can be a happier wife. I can
Yep,
welcome him home, and it all seems so
exactly.
picture perfect, which it's not. But
That's the
a
goal.
lot
That's
of
the
it is
feeling you want it.
yeah, and a lot of this work is selfish work in this fact that it's healing. It's
Mm-hmm.
healing for me. It's not.
Definitely.
It will. The byproduct will be that your relationship will
Yeah.
improve.
You don't want to come
It's
out
actually
altruistic, you
more.
mean? You're
Yeah,
saying it's for you too. Yeah, I get
yeah,
it. I
it's
get it.
definitely
So,
a huge part.
how are other people in your world handling that? Like, do you talk to your friends who haven't had
Yeah,
this sort of epiphany,
yeah,
and what's going on there?
yeah,
Just
yeah.
curious.
So I think we're very yeah, we don't shy back from speaking of these things, and I think we've definitely been able to influence people in a positive way and open these things up. Um, so much so that some have had babies as a result of it and have
Mm,
chosen to have kids who weren't going to. Um, and again, making small little decisions, along the way. Um, and I think, especially having the story, your own testimony, if you'd like to call it, makes it a lot easier. And that's why you should share it with people because
definitely.
it's never about going to people and saying, oh my gosh, your relationship's like this. And
No,
and telling people what to do. It's just in almost conversation that these things will come up and being vulnerable to share and not being scared or ashamed of your situation at all. And it won't take you long for people to be like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, of course. That you just see the lights just go on, and
I
then I
love it.
think they start to piece it together in their own life.
I love it. I love it, Lauren. That's
Yeah,
why I wanted to have you on because you're just my fave to talk to, and I really, really appreciate your taking the time. I've
thank
just
you,
love seeing you, and I love keeping up with you and Jared, and it's just been really satisfying. So I
thank
appreciate your
you,
coming on, and thank you for being so honest. I think people are really going to love this, and it will
yeah,
be very empowering for them
yeah.
to
I
hear.
hope so. I truly believe through again all the personal developments, all the different types of healing, methodologies, and Jared and I are very inquisitive. But out of all the things I think that we in every path that we've taken, I can say, in my opinion, that I think the most important one is healing the relationships, is healing the masculine and the feminine. We can pretty much solve a lot of the world's problems if we just get this one thing right.
Amen. Oh my gosh, Lauren, amen. We're going to end on that note because I can't top that. Okay, Lauren,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
thank you. We'll talk again. And that ends this hour of the Suzanne Venker Show. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave us a review, as well as share this episode with a friend. As always, you may reach me with any questions or comments at Suzanne@thesuzannevenkershow.com. And if you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can do so at patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.